Hey there, and welcome to Wyoming's Scaly and Slimy Critters, the 7th of 14 live sessions on both YouTube and Facebook that are part of the Digital 2021 Wyoming Outdoor Expo. And a special welcome to those of you joining from classrooms across Wyoming and beyond. If you need to leave early, you can always come back to the recordings on the Wyoming Game and Fish Department YouTube channel, Facebook page, or wyomingexpo.com. This session will last about 30 minutes, and we want to hear your questions, so stay close to that keyboard. We're going to practice with 2 questions to answer in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if you're part of a classroom, tell us your grade level and school name too. And the other question is if you've ever had a scaly or slimy critter, a reptile or amphibian as a pet, tell us what it was and what its name was if it had one. And then watch to see if Andy, Mason, or Ashley mention it. Without further ado, let's check out some scaly, slimy critters.
Hi, I'm Ashley Leonard. I'm the Conservation Education Coordinator at Wyoming Game and Fish.
And I'm Mason. I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator at the University of Wyoming Biodiversity Institute.
My name's Andy Gigley. I'm the ferret biologist for Game and Fish right now. I've worked with herps for a long, long time. I'm happy to talk about them. So just start out a little bit of background on herps, and that's what we call reptiles and amphibians. You might be aware of these small animals that live in the water, dirt. Well, you might not know the differences between reptiles and amphibians. They seem similar. They're both vertebrates, just like you and me, in that they have a backbone. But they're different than us and your parents and your dog in that they are what we call ectotherms, or cold-blooded, and that means they get their body temperature from the environment, whereas most of our body temperature comes from the food we eat. Almost 100% of the food we eat goes towards warming ourselves, whereas snakes, lizards, frogs, and toads get their heat from the sun. You might see a lizard basking on a rock on a bright and sunny day. That's them keeping themselves warm. This is good and bad. On the good side, they don't need to eat as much, but they also have to have special adaptations to make it through the winter, etc. It also means they can live in deserts very, very easily. So it's the differences between reptiles and amphibians. One, reptiles have scales. Their skin is dry. The only time they're going to be wet is when they've been swimming. If you ever heard somebody or yourselves mention that a snake is slimy, it's a bit of a misconception. They're dry. They're just very smooth and they can kind of feel slimy. On the other hand, frogs and toads, they spend far more time in the water. Their skin can actually be slimy, and some species actually exude slime. Amphibian skin is very cool because they can use their skin to breathe, whereas we use lungs. Amphibians can use their skin and their lungs, or gills, depending on how old they are. Some species actually don't have lungs at all, and they breathe completely through their skin. And because of this, it's really important to have clean hands when you handle amphibians, or just wear latex gloves. You don't want stuff getting in your lungs. Amphibians don't want stuff getting in their lungs, which is their skin. So both reptiles and amphibians do come from eggs. Amphibians are different in that you've seen probably in puddles of water. Tadpoles, larvae, polywogs is another term for them. Most amphibians start out life in this larval form. As they grow, they metamorphose into the adult frogs that we know. So they go from breathing water with gills to growing a pair of lungs, growing legs, and it's a really cool phenomenon that happens every year in Wyoming. Reptiles, on the other hand, they basically just are born looking like their adult selves. You might be familiar with reptiles being hatched from eggs, and that's true, but some reptiles in this state they hatch from their eggs inside the mother, and it appears that they give live birth. We call this ovoviparity. Rattlesnakes, shorthorn lizards. These are just some examples of snakes or reptiles that are born inside the mom and then birth, kind of like a mammal. So with that, we've got some critters we can show you. In particular, one's named Shredder. So stay tuned to meet Shredder. He's a pretty cool one. And Mason and Ashley will take that away. Be sure to send in any questions you've got, and we'll see if we can answer them for you. Take it away, guys.
Okay, so first let's dive into the amphibians of Wyoming. In Wyoming, we've got 11 species of frogs and toads and 1 species of salamander. So I have with me today 2 of my coworkers from the Biodiversity Institute who are going to help me talk about amphibians. So this is Tim, and this is Ted. And they are western tiger salamanders. We think they're about 10 years old. And that's about middle-aged for a tiger salamander. They can live about 20 years in the wild, although there's been some records of some up into their 30s. So they're a pretty long-lived animal. And Tim and Tad are western tiger salamander, the only salamander species that's found in Wyoming. And they're also our state amphibian. And they're a really good choice for our state amphibian because they're found throughout the state at elevations lower than about 10,000 feet in a variety of habitats. We're gonna put one of them away. They're a little squirmy. And they're also a really resilient animal. So these guys belong to a family of salamanders that are referred to as the mole salamanders. And they get the name mole salamander because they spend most of the year underground in existing animal burrows, or they dig their own little tunnels. And then when it's a warm, wet spring evening, these guys will come up out of the ground and begin migrating to breeding ponds. And sometimes they can migrate a couple of miles, which a couple of miles to you and I aren't a whole lot. But when you're only as big as this little tiger salamander and you're food for a lot of the native animals out there, it's a pretty perilous journey that they make. But they're really resilient. Even if it starts snowing while they migrate, they still keep going. So they're a really, really special amphibian for our state. There's also some other resilient amphibians in the state, such as some of our frogs and toads. So all of our amphibians rely on water for the first part of their life cycle. They breed in ponds or in temporary little water puddles. They lay their eggs, which then develop into the larval salamander or the tadpoles. And then they go through grow up in the ponds, and then they go through metamorphosis to become the terrestrial adult forms that most of us see hopping on land, or like what I'm holding right here. And although they all require water for the first part of their stage, some of our amphibians aren't found near permanent water sources. So things like our Great Plains toad or our spadefoot toads are found in areas without any permanent standing water, really dry areas of the state. And just like the tiger salamander, they spend most of their life underground. And when it rains, they'll come up to feed or to breed, and then they'll go right back underground. So they're able to live in those dry areas because of that they're able to stay underground to keep from drying out. So Wyoming, as we know, can be kind of a harsh place to live because of the winters. The winters are really cold. So most of our amphibians are going to be hibernating underground, but some of our amphibians, like the wood frog, actually has a really cool ability to almost completely freeze over. And they create kind of like an antifreeze of sorts within their body that protects their organs. And then they're able to completely freeze, and they actually start moving to breeding ponds while there's still snow on the ground. So that way before any of our other amphibians do. Now, although some of our amphibians are really resilient, they do face some threats. Here in Wyoming, some of the bigger threats are habitat loss, as well as invasive species. So invasive fish and even an invasive amphibian, the bullfrog, can decimate native amphibian populations. So type in the comments, what do you think you can do to help the amphibians of Wyoming? Let us know in the comments.
So thank you, Mason. While we're moving on to our next scaly friend, we've got some questions here. In particular, I apologize. Michaela, I believe, on Facebook asked, have we had trouble with people trying to sell wild-caught reptiles, particularly in Wyoming? There is always that potential. particularly for species that are considered desirable, and there is a black market for some of these things. For instance, we have a species of rattlesnake in the state. We only have two, the prairie rattlesnake and the midget-faded rattlesnake. The midget-faded rattlesnake is very special, and there have been historical cases of people stealing those animals and selling them on the black market. And occasionally you hear tales of people trafficking, say, turtles through Wyoming. Unfortunately, we get wind of these when they pop up. I'm sure we don't catch everything. Jackie Ann on Facebook asked, what caused the Wyoming toad to become endangered? And that's a very good question. And in fact, the Wyoming toad wasn't just endangered, it was considered extinct in the wild. And there's a whole host of problems. We'll pick one big one, the amphibian disease caused by a fungus, chytrid, can infect amphibians, gets into their skin, which you recall is used to respire, to breathe by amphibians. And if this fungus gets into their skin, it can interfere with oxygen transfer and cause cardiac arrest. The animals can drown. Otherwise, destroy amphibian populations. And that's one of the main concerns with the Wyoming toad, although, as Mason alluded to, habitat loss is also a big factor for amphibians. Fortunately, after the toad was declared extinct, a few were found. We started a captive breeding population, and Game and Fish and the Fish and Wildlife Service are working on reintroducing the animal to the wild, and things are definitely looking up in that regard. Let's see. How many amphibians in Wyoming are poisonous? From Randy on YouTube. Let's see. The amphibians that are poisonous, and that's different from venomous. Venomous is when a substance is injected into you, so like a rattlesnake. Poisonous being if you ingest something, then it causes problems. That would be limited to the toads, and the toads have glands on the back of their necks, and those glands can secrete a toxin, and that toxin is there to dissuade animals from bothering them. I've seen, say, a skunk or other predator pick up a toad, and it secretes this milky poison, and it tastes really bad. I've gotten it on my fingers. I've tasted it too. It's super bitter, not good.
Wait. You've tasted that stuff that comes out of toads?
So if you do this long enough, mistakes are made, and you need to like turn the page of a notebook, and you've been handling a toad, and you might not have gloves, and it's gross. Would not recommend. Don't go licking toads. It's not a good time for anybody. But that's the idea behind that. And let's see, the Rocky Mountain toad, the Wyoming toad, boreal toad, and I believe, I don't actually know off the top of my head if spadefoot toads are poisonous. So 3 to 5.
Okay, cool. Well,
we'll kick it back, and we'll visit a new scaly friend.
All right. And before you get going, Mason, I just want to mention that some schools that we've got out there, from Powell and Casper and Upton and Lander, Pinedale, Douglas, Green River, and they have a class pet frog. And then New Meadows, Idaho, welcome back. You were around quite a bit yesterday, and so glad to see you guys. So thanks everybody for joining in. And if you are just joining, this is Wyoming's Scaly and Slimy Critters, coming to you from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department in the wonderful United States of America. So go. All right.
Okay. I hope y'all enjoyed meeting Tim and Tad. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the reptiles of Wyoming. So in Wyoming, we have 16 species of snakes, 9 species of lizards, and 4 species of turtles. So I've got another coworker with me today. This is Hogson. He is a western hognose snake. And they get the name hognose, and hopefully maybe you can see his little upturned snout there. It's not quite cooperating. They've got a little upturned snout that they use to help them dig into the ground. So that's where they get the name hognose from. And Hodgson is about 3 years old. He's a pretty small snake, as you can see. In this species, the females are actually a little bit larger than the males. And so he's a male, he's gonna stay a little bit small. Hodgson is a really cool little snake. I don't think he's gonna do it because he's pretty comfortable today, but when these guys are threatened, they can actually flatten and spread out the skin on their neck to kind of make them look like a cobra. If you can picture like what a cobra hood looks like. Some people call these guys puff adders or cobras because of that, but they're just doing that to make themselves appear bigger. And if that doesn't work, they can really dramatically play dead. And so he'll start convulsing or spasming and then flip over and dramatically die. So he'll open up his mouth, his tongue will hang limply out of his mouth, and he can even sometimes excrete everything from his cloaca to create a really bad smell that smells like something just died. And if that will hopefully work to scare away something, he'll kind of stay in that position for a little bit, and then he'll flip back over, look around, make sure the threat's gone, and then slither on happily on his way, safe and sound to live another day. And how many of you, if you want to let us know in the comments, have you ever seen a hognose snake in the wild before? You may not have, because they're not super widespread in the state, and they're a little bit small, and typically they're only active around dawn or dusk. But some other snakes you may have seen is like the wandering or western terrestrial garter snake. They're a really common widespread snake in the state. So you may have seen that, or you may have seen one of our bull snakes because they're really large. They're the largest snake in Wyoming. They can reach about 7 feet in length. So much larger than the 3 feet maximum that the hognose snake can reach. Like Andy mentioned, we only have 2 venomous species of snakes in the state that are harmful to people, and that's the prairie rattlesnake and the midget-faded rattlesnake. And like Andy said, the midget-faded rattlesnake is pretty rare and restricted to only a small part of the state, whereas the prairie rattlesnake is a little bit more widespread. But you don't need to be afraid of rattlesnakes. If you're outside or hiking and you see a rattlesnake, the best thing to do is just give it plenty of space and keep walking around it. Snakes don't want anything to do with people. They don't chase after people. That's a myth. They want to get away from us. So as long as you give the rattlesnake space and you just keep going on your way, both of y'all can go off and continue the rest of your day safely. So now that we've learned a little bit about the reptiles and amphibians of Wyoming, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who's going to tell us where we could possibly find some if y'all want to see some in the wild.
Hi, everybody. So if you want to let us know in the chat, if you have any ideas what habitats or where you should look if you're interested in seeing some more of these scaly and slimy critters around our state. And while I wait for you to throw your comments in there, I'm excited to see what they are. I'll give you some tips to help you look for them. So first things first, as you may have noticed with the animals that Mason just showed us, a lot of them have some cryptic coloration or camouflage on their bodies. A lot of them have, a lot of beige-like colors, lots of breakup of their pattern, and that helps them blend into their landscape, which is great to help them evade predators. It does make it trickier if you're looking for them. So you might have to look very closely while you're looking for them. Most reptiles and amphibians in our state are active during the day, but a few species are nocturnal. Like Mason mentioned, some of the snakes are especially active like right around dawn and dusk. And like Andy talked about before, they have to use their habitat around them to regulate their body temperature. So they really need to be active during certain times of the day to warm up if they need the sun to warm up, or if it's particularly cold out, they need to warm up. But if it's really hot out, they might not be out in the middle of the day because they don't want to get too hot. And if you do find a reptile or amphibian, first of all, that's really exciting. Congrats. Next thing you should do is give it some space. Like any animal out in the wild, for your safety and for their safety, if you just leave it alone, that's probably best for everybody, but it's totally okay to take a picture of it. And I would actually encourage that you capture that really cool moment by taking a picture, and then you can even look into citizen science apps like iNaturalist, and you can submit your sighting of those creatures to that app and help scientists like the people at the University of Wyoming or at the Game and Fish Department. We can use that data to help us learn more about the distribution of these animals. So I'm curious, where are some habitats people thought that these animals might live? We have some people that answered that.
Yeah, let's see. I saw everything from Sinks Canyon, which is true, ponds and creeks and under rocks, under buildings. All of those are, yeah, about right for the different kinds we've got. The desert, exclamation point. Yes. Thank you, Jackie Ann on Facebook. How about the hognose snake in particular? Where can we find that in Wyoming?
So that snake, it can, as far as habitat, it can be found in like the plains and some drier areas. And when people mentioned, around rocks or under buildings, rocky outcroppings, any type of shelter are things that attract wildlife because it can provide them with some space to hide from predators and also help regulate their body temperature if they, need the shade or they need some more sun. Mason, can you speak to the actual geographic distribution of the hognose? Maybe Andy can.
Yes, I can certainly do that. The eastern portion of the state.
Cool.
I'd have to look at a map to tell you precisely where the line is.
For sure.
We'll just say east.
Yeah, definitely. And like in general, you can find most snakes and lizards around our state can be found in the sagebrush or plains, kind of like drier habitats and rocky outcroppings. But if you're near wetlands, rivers, lakes, those are good places to find garter snakes, the wandering garter snakes, as well as turtles and other amphibians. So that's where we can find all of these critters. Did we have any more questions come in? Or should
I see lots of questions.
Okay, let's take a couple questions before we move on to our last critter.
Yeah, before we get to the main event here, I know you're all stoked for Shredder. I got to scroll up a little bit. You guys have been busy. Let's see. How do reptiles climb on walls? Well, it's not quite as common around here. It certainly happens, and lizards have very small claws. They can get in cracks on, I don't know about this like drywall I've got here, but particularly in stucco. Moving out globally, just for trivia, geckos have toe pads, and they have very, very fine hairs that actually interact on a molecular level. It's kind of like a magnet, sort of. Van der Waals forces, if you're familiar with physics, is what it's called. And they'll just stick up the walls. They hang on the ceiling, and it's really cool. That's my nerd out for geckos that we don't have in the state. Let's see. Do rattlesnakes migrate? From Terry on Facebook. Rattlesnakes, short answer is usually no. But rattlesnakes overwinter in dens. They've got to get down far enough where they won't freeze to death. But around about this time of year, they'll start exiting the dens and warming up and feeding, etc. And they can move many, many miles and kilometers across the landscape on trips for food, mates, habitats, etc. But what's really cool, they're very loyal to their den site. So they'll come back at the end of the active season. They'll come back however many miles to the same hole in the ground and the rocks and slither down into the same place. So that's really cool. They have a home just the way you do. Let's see. Why are snakes not found in the Wamsutter area or Wamsutter? I have a bit of an accent. That's from John on YouTube. Some places in this state are, those of us who live in Wyoming are aware that it can be kind of a rugged, difficult to live in place, and that's true for amphibians and reptiles as well. And there's some places where they don't persist or they don't do very well. For instance, rattlesnakes don't spend a whole lot of time around Laramie. It's just a little bit too high in the winter, just rough. I suspect that is why. That said, snakes are up around Wamsutter. It's just that they may not be in the higher concentrations as they might be in other portions of the state. Let's see. We'll do a couple more because I know we want to meet Shredder. This one's important. What do you do if you find an injured snake? Karen on Facebook. Thank you for that. And this is true of animals in general. If you find an injured animal, the best thing that you can do is to let it be. And it sounds cruel, but one, it might not actually be injured. It may be a bird or a snake or another animal who's feigning injury, trying to keep itself safe from you because it's frightened, or it might be trying to draw you away from its young. So the best thing to do is to leave it alone. This is particularly important because if an animal actually is hurt and you try to render aid in some fashion, it's already hurt and scared, and that's the time where it's going to lash out at you. So if you see a wounded rattlesnake, leave it alone. It sounds cruel. Let it be. We'll do one more. Can snakes hear? They sure can. Thank you, John, from YouTube. Amphibians and reptiles can all, for the most part, hear. It's a little different than ours, depending on the species. Hearing is just sensing vibration in the air or through the ground, or in water if you're ever swam in a pool or a lake. And these low-slung critters that spend most of their time on the ground can feel vibrations from footsteps, etc., in their bodies. They also have ears too, and they call to attract mates. You might hear them out on the plains in spring after rainstorms. Those are the toads calling, looking for a friend. So let's meet Shredder right quick.
All right, so without further ado, here is our aptly named turtle here named Shredder. He is a common snapping turtle. They are native to Wyoming. They're actually called common for a very good reason. They can be found all the way from up in Canada all the way down to the southern tip of Florida. So they are very common. They live up to their name. They're aquatic, so they live in the water. They prefer slower moving water with a muddy bottom, so like rivers, ponds, lakes, and they like to bury down in the mud and hang out there. They're not aggressive generally. They pretty much, like most reptiles and honestly most wildlife, they would rather not interact with people. If you just leave them alone, they are not harmful to you. But if you do bother them, especially when females are kind of coming up to nest and lay their eggs, at which they do on land, they might feel especially vulnerable. And if you're bothering them, they might be tempted to defend themselves using their very strong jaws and bite. Speaking of their jaws, why don't you tell us in the chat if you have some ideas of what you think Shredder might like to eat? Tell us what you think he would like to have for a snack. And then while we wait for those to come in, I would like to tell you a little bit about Shredder's shell. So a lot of people think that turtles can maybe crawl out of their shells. Cartoons don't exactly help us think otherwise. You often see cartoons where turtles just run right out of their shell, but in actuality, their shell is fused to their spine. The top of their shell, the top part, is called the carapace. And the bottom here, you can see he has a little bottom plate here. That's called a plastron. And then you can see there's this little bridge here, and that connects the top to the bottom. And so he is fully a part of his shell at all times. If you ever see a turtle not in its shell, that turtle will not be very alive. And so we have some people I see said that they might eat leaves, fish, plants. Some people thought cabbage or grasshoppers or strawberries, mice, fish, lizards, lettuce, vegetables. General consensus of one class was lettuce. So I heard a lot of correct answers out there for what Shredder likes to eat. He is an omnivore, just like people. That means he likes to eat plants and animals. They eat fish, worms, plants, insects, small mammals, anything that kind of comes their way. So they are what we call an ambush predator or a sit and wait predator. They like to really just bury themselves in the mud and kind of hang out, mind their own business, and not waste a lot of energy while they wait for their food to come to them. So they hide very, very well. You can see he has a lot of dangly bits and just is kind of would blend in very well in the muddy bottom of a river or lake. And then if anything happens to come right by his mouth, then he will take advantage of that and chomp them right up. They have extremely strong jaws and kind of a beaked mouth. And so you definitely would not want to put anything, including your fingers as a person, near the front half of this turtle. You'd notice I'm holding him from the back of his shell. That's because his neck is actually very long, and he might be tempted to nibble on my finger if I put it too close to his face. So would anyone watching like to see Shredder eat a snack today? I'm guessing people would like to. So I'm going to go ahead and put him in his tank, and we're going to feed him some night crawlers. All right, so Shredder is now in his tank, and he is going to have a little bit of a snack for us, maybe, if he's interested. He might be a little stressed out from having been held for that little bit of time, but he might want to eat a worm. Oh, there he goes. I think he's thinking about it. Come on, Shredder, live up to your name. Let's see if maybe he wants this worm. Oh, there he goes. He got that worm. Oh, there he goes. He is eating that worm right up. And in the wild, this is something that they would definitely eat as well. If a nightcrawler found its way into their habitat, they would chomp it right up. So he is just finished off that first worm right there. He's just chomping it right down, as you can see. And we'll see if maybe he goes to any of the other worms here that we have given him the opportunity to have a snack on. He is just still eating right away. Does anyone have any more questions while we watch Shredder eat? We can answer a couple more questions.
Let's see. What do we have? What is the most venomous snake in Wyoming? Since we only have the two venomous snakes, snake and midget faded. And of those two, the midget faded is considered more venomous. There's a whole host of reasons for that, but one of them is because depending on the age of the snake, there is a mix between hemotoxin, which damages tissue and causes swelling, etc., and neurotoxin, which attacks the central nervous system and impedes things like movement, so it causes paralysis and can cause problems with breathing. Again, though, you don't have, as long as you're careful and watch where you're stepping, you don't have anything to worry about from rattlesnakes. They don't want to do anything to do with you. They're just trying to get away. That's what the tail's for.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, and Shredder's having a ball.
Yeah, Shredder's definitely living up to his name right now, just going to town on these earthworms. He was definitely hungry. So thanks for joining us and meeting all of our scaly critters and slimy critters today. Hopefully you learned something about reptiles and amphibians in our state.
Yes, thank you. And Ashley, there's a couple more questions. So while I wrap this up, I think what we'll do, I've got a few things to say, and then we'll come back to questions and we can watch Shredder do his thing here. And thank you guys, all three of you. I learned a lot. And one thing that I learned that I can relate back to yesterday is that we learned that the Hognose Snake, the females are larger than the males. And we also learned that about Jupiter yesterday as well, that great horned owls are the females are about a head taller than the males. So snakes and owls have something in common. How cool is that? Thank you, everybody, for spending your time with us. We've dropped a link to the evaluation in the comment section. Please just take a few minutes to fill that out. We want these to be useful to you, and your feedback is how we can make them better. We'll also mail you this very cool limited edition cutthroat trout and pronghorn sticker, enough for all in your family. So fill that out and we will do that. We're also going to drop a link eventually into the comments about our checklist of 100 outdoor fun things for kids or adults to do year-round in Wyoming. It includes things we've learned today, like finding a horned lizard or a tiger salamander, as well as things like identifying wildlife poop and to bait your own hook. So lots of fun. So let's take a few more questions. We've got folks that say thank you. And we want to know, Ashley, Amber Williams wants to know about turtle predators. Are there any turtle predators? Does anything eat turtles?
Yes, there are some predators of turtles. So there are some mammals that like to eat turtles, especially the ones that live closer to water. Smaller turtles can fall prey to things like minks. Otters would also like to eat turtles. And then even if they're, say, coming up on land to lay their eggs, raccoons like to eat turtles quite a bit. And then even birds, some of our larger raptors can actually swoop down and flip a turtle on their back, and we all know that's very tricky for a turtle to rescue themselves at that point, and they'll go ahead and eat them. But in defense, turtles have shells, so many turtles can pull most of their body, and for box turtles especially, they can really hinge their shell up and get almost entirely in their shell to help protect against predators. Now, our buddy Shredder here, snapping turtles, you saw their plaster on the bottom part of their shell is pretty small, and they have a lot of meaty limbs hanging out there. So they really do spend most of their time hanging out on the bottom of the river because they can't use their shell as much as a defense. So it varies, but good question.
Cool. And we have one that says, Scaly from YouTube wants to know if snakes eat other snakes.
Yes, they do. Some snakes do eat other snakes. Not all snakes eat other snakes, but some do. And Andy, can you maybe speak more specifically? I believe that gopher snakes sometimes can often eat rattlesnakes in our state. So definitely want to keep those guys around.
Yes. So snakes in this state, and gopher snakes and bull snakes in particular, being the largest ones. The dividing line is about in the middle of the state. Bull snakes on the east, gopher snakes on the west. But they look very similar. Back to the question. Yes, they do. They have been known to eat rattlesnakes. I would enjoy seeing that fight. They can eat garter snakes. Basically, what a gopher snake or a bull snake will, if it can fit in their mouth, and they can subdue it, they'll take a bite out of it.
Cool. All right, and one more Shredder question, and then we'll wrap things up. We have two classes that are interested in how fast Shredder can move, and one of them is Mrs. Seifert's class in Lander.
Well, contrary to what you might believe, because they spend a lot of their time just chilling in the mud, they can actually move very quickly, especially with their long neck, as you can see right now when he's chomping this worm down. They're an ambush predator, so they do like to just sit very still quite a lot of the time. But when they want to move, they can actually move very quickly. They can lash their neck out very, very fast. And then on land, I mean, they can move probably a couple miles an hour when they're trying to get somewhere. And then they can actually swim pretty fast in the water too. They don't spend a lot of time swimming around, but if they do, they have webbed feet. So when they do want to swim, they can actually move pretty quickly through the water as well. They're more agile than they might look.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And Mason, thanks for bringing your Hognose Snake, Hogson. He's super cute. And Ashley and Andy, thank you for taking your time. Everyone online, thank you for being here. Our next event is at noon today. We'll go behind the scenes at a taxidermist and a meat processor, and we'd love to see you there. So for more information about Expo or to watch our previously recorded events, check us out at wyomingexpo.com and click on Expo Live. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you